Right, that looks better. So let's see slideshow.
Yep, you start screening. You're going to go to slideshow, and I'm going to go to mute.
Right. Yeah, I've got it. I've got it. I've got it.
There you go. You're
Okay.
on.
Okie doke. Right. Well, thanks for inviting me to have this chat with you tonight or this afternoon. What it is, it's a project that I've took on some few years ago, really to look at my family and their contribution, if that's the best way of putting it, um, during the Second World War. We initially, Laurie and I talked about it. We were going to do it as one session, but it really would have been like death by PowerPoint because, as you can see from the photograph there, there's eight siblings, and to give some balance, I put my grandfather in as well, who's a professional soldier. So what we're going to do, we're going to do it as in three elements. So part one today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the First War actually, and then we're going to move on to the my father and who was out in the Pacific and on D-Day, and then part two, which will be the next time we get together, we'll be talking about a couple of my uncles and Arnhem. One was airborne at Arnhem, taken prisoner, and again convoy work, defense, quick convoys, D-Day again, Caen, and the defensively equipped merchant ships. And then the part three, we're going to be talking about three more uncles. As I say, this the idea is that there's eight, but because we wanted to strike some balance, I've added my grandfather in as well. And part three would be North Africa, Salerno, Monte Cassino, D-Day, Caen, Germany, and the British Army on the Rhine. So, as I say, there's eight originally. We divided it by three. It wasn't really going to work out, so I've thrown in added my grandfather too, so we can have some balance of the presentation. And he's the person we're going to start with, really. And the main reason he's introduced is not because of his contribution to the Second World War, which was probably modest in compared to the rest of them, but he was a professional soldier. Okay, he was born, as it says there, in 1883 in East London. So out of our family, he's actually the only true Cockney, and born in the within the sound of Bow bells. In those days, he went to school. He went to the Ragged School, and it was law in 1883 that they had to go to school at 13, and there was only two options. You either went to a paid school. There was two schools in Clerkenwell. If you couldn't afford that, then you went to the Ragged School. Some kids clearly didn't go to school at all. They need the money, and their families need the money, so they just, swerved that and went straight out to work. The street on the right hand side was where he was brought up in G Street in Hoxton. It's no longer there. Now I don't know what he did after the age of 13. I don't, I never really paid a lot, and this is not necessarily about that. I'm really just trying to give you some background. He became a barman in the Queen's Head in Shoreditch. It's actually there now. I went in there a couple of years ago just to see what it was like, and he worked in there until he joined the army. Um, I think his joining the army was probably about escaping. I mean, they weren't a very wealthy family. I mean, his father was died in a workhouse, so I mean, or my great grandfather died in a workhouse, so they weren't particularly wealthy. And the army in those days, or the military in them days, was a bit of an escape. So he joined the Territorial Army. They call it the Army Reserve now in 1901, and he was there for 18 months. His discharge docs, which I've got a copy of, say that he failed to attend. But basically, what I think happened was he joined the regular army. That was his way, his escape. What he did was on in 1902, he enlisted in the East Surrey Regiment. If you look at the background, the black and white photograph is the depot at that time. I've included the two colour photos because it would them can illustrate the colours of the uniforms that they were wearing. Basic 12 weeks basic training, so it consisted of things. As I've researched this, things don't seem to change an awful lot. It would do basic drill, foot drill. They'll be doing PT. There'll be weapon use. It was probably the Martini Henry or the Remington. I'm not really sure. Maybe both. They'll be doing field craft. And interestingly enough, there'd be education. They would go into education, and I think that's important. So I think that it's important to note that the army recognised that educated soldiers were good soldiers. So their daily life, what did it consist of? Well, it was quite structured. They had set meal times. They reckon that the diet was pretty monotonous, but it was better than the food that you'd get out in Civvy Street, and they looked after their health. So as I say, they spent the first 12 weeks there, and then they would go into their regiment where they would um, put try like a phase two of their training. They try and put their skills into practice. Now he stayed there in barracks until October '03 when he joined a troop ship, and there's a photograph of it at the bottom right there, to go out to join the regiment in India. Now he could have gone earlier, but up until then, the regiment was in South Africa, so it really wasn't any point flight. The Boer War had finished. They were being moved out, thinning out the soldiers in South Africa, and so they moved them to India. And so there was no point going to Africa and then jumping on. So he went straight with, according to the or the regimental diaries, he went on the 23rd of December 1903, and he arrived with 134 fellow soldiers. By the way, the picture on the left-hand side here, that's the actual barracks gate to the East Surrey depot, which is still in existence now. He then went by troop train, 6-day journey to Lucknow, and there's not necessarily his train, but there's an example of what it would have been like. I actually think they're better, those trains in that photo, than some of the trains are now out there. Right, so then we go to this. Now, before we get there, the troopship journey took about 6 to 10 weeks. I probably jumped a little bit too far ahead. And the condition, it wasn't a set of conditions that the soldiers liked very much. They weren't very comfortable. It was cramped and it was uncomfortable. The food, it was hot, and the food wasn't particularly to their liking. And as you can imagine, if they're not used to being at sea, um, it's just not a particularly enjoyable experience. And they were very, very glad to get onto dry land. So anyway, back to Lucknow, and there's an image of Lucknow there. What you see behind you is the administrative buildings. Right over here is where the accommodation is, or was. This building here, believe it or not, is the bakery. Now, Thomas would recognise all of these things. Obviously, they're not from his photograph album, and many of these photographs aren't, but they are things that he would have recognised. So again, he gets there, and it's kind of an extension from his basic training. Like a lot of in any army environment, even now, you're either cleaning or training. Yeah, so they're out in the field, they're doing exercises, and during their time out there, they had a number of inspections. They were out on exercise locally. In fact, they lost a couple of soldiers through accidents out in the rocky terrain. And then they'll be doing their drill and their fitness. So it's kind of like very, very, very much so. And they also, of course, did a lot of sport. They had boxing competitions and such like that. The typical rotation for a British regiment in India was between 7 and 12 years. That's quite a long time away from home. Now, I figure that only through research, it's very difficult because a lot of records, East Surrey in particularly, but a lot of records were destroyed during the Blitz. And so the First World War soldiers' records are not always that easy to come by. So you have to kind of work in peripherals and try and from other documents work out what went on. I got a feeling that they were out for 7 years because they were already out for 2 years in Africa, so they would have been going home. What you have here is a picture there, which I believe is probably the last part, is the passing out parade, which Thomas would have been on. This was in Mahal in 1909. So Mahal, why is that important? Well, Mahal was the signal school, and he trained as a signaller. At the initial photograph, you'll see he's got cross flags on his sleeve, and that indicates that he'd been there. It's also got a couple of stripes, which I think was 6 years service. It was a very early stage of signals. It was mostly semaphore and stuff like that. It soon trained. When he went back in, when he was remobilised for the First War, it obviously moved on quite a bit. The interesting fact is that signal school is still used by the Indian Army now. They still centre their place. So he discharged from regular service in 1909. The rules were then you did about 9 years, 8, 9 years, then you go the rest of the 5 years on a special class reserve, similar in some ways to how we work now. 1914, he was mobilised, and he basically went to a garrison battalion. And a garrison battalion, he went into the Essex Regiment, is a battalion that is mostly the old and bold. The older soldiers, maybe soldiers are not quite as fit for frontline duties. Now, by that time, Thomas would have been in his 30s, so maybe it was considered considered to be his best posting. But as you'll see later, he very much ended up in the front line. The ship down below there was the ship that he went out. So on the 24th of August, they assembled and were shipped out to Gallipoli. They boarded the ship at Devonport, which is near Plymouth, adjacent to Plymouth, and they sailed for Gallipoli. And they would have arrived at a small island called Imbros, which was like a dropping off point. Now, what you've got here in this photograph is a couple of photographs here. The large photograph in front of you is the RHQ at Anzac Beach. So once they'd gone to Imbros, they then went shoreside onto the peninsula. And again, Thomas would have recognised that. He would have worked there, and he would have worked adjacent to it. So the IWM in the corner is the Imperial War Museum. So these are official photographs. It didn't stay there for very long because it was soon ranged and targeted by the Turks, and they found it was not safe to work there, so they moved on. The other photos, the smaller photographs, are not really easy to see. This one here, the top one, is the Essex Regiment arriving in Gallipoli, and the one underneath by the shore side there, these chaps here, that's Anzac Beach there. They're the Essex, they're the signallers running cables. You know, could Thomas be one of those? Maybe, maybe not, but they weren't there for a hellish long time. Okay, so as we know now that they withdrew from Gallipoli very early on, 1916, and eventually on that ship that you see there, the one at the bottom right, they arrived. They went bound to Egypt and Alexandria, where he joined the second company, the 5th Battalion. Now, with the British Army, it is not uncommon to change regiments. You know, you can get drafted, and often they found, and you'll see later as I go through it, that when there was a shortage of manpower, personnel, they would close a regiment or a battalion down and redisperse the troops. And when we talk about Wally, he's in the third presentation. I mean, that he was all over the place. You know, it seemed like there wasn't something going on in Europe that he wasn't there or nearby, and he was in 2 or 3 different regiments during that time. So, okay, now we get to Gaza, and this is the third Battle of Gaza. So they landed into that. So they went from Alexandria, landed across, and went into action on the first night, 1917, to basically bolster the Egyptian expeditionary force at Beersheba, and basically to try and subdivide the Turks who were trying to create pincer movements. Logistics was a big problem out there, and just like it is anywhere. And I've been read extensively on Arnhem that every time anyone moved forward, then the Germans would pincer back behind and try and cut the supply lines. There was no difference there. Allenby was in charge, ordered to attack. The advance began at 3 a.m. Hampshire's objective being Burge Trench and the Redoubt. A heavy Turkish barrage caused confusion. Basically A Company captured the wrong, attacked, but captured the wrong trench. Not their objective, but they did manage to secure the position, take prisoners, and move on. The brigade settled down to secure a front line, but found consolidation difficult in the face of enemy shell and sniper fire. They remained in position until the 5th of November, consolidating and improving communications. The same day, battalions shifted to the left, then resumed assault on Gaza. This attack met no resistance. The Turks had been evacuated the town, and they were withdrawn into, and the regiment was withdrawn into reserve. Now, there was another battle then. Again, he was involved with 3 actions, Thomas, and this is the second one. On the 9th of November, they began to advance northeast towards Junction Station, where the railway from Jerusalem to Beersheba met. The aim was to split again the Turkish forces in 2. The attack at the junction began on the 13th of November, was eventually captured along with a great haul of rolling stock and supplies. So that battle was successful. He now turned his attention to Jerusalem, which lay towards the east. Now, as I say, they started to really incur quite a few casualties, and as it says there, that just that one battalion had, that company had lost that battalion had lost over 100 men. The Turks launched a major counter-offensive, but once again, the um, the supply lines were so badly hit that and they were so short of soldiers on the Western Front that they decided to stay. So this battle on the Berkwood never really took place. It was started and halted, and people were held back and redeployed to the Western Front, except for um, uh, uh, Thomas, who stayed in theatre and again was transferred to the Royal Leicestershire Regiment. Now, these photographs here, just to show you a couple of, it's the Hampshire Regiment down, which he was transferred in and out of. That's a photograph there at the back, not very clear, and I apologise for that. But because of the, excuse me, because of the nature of this group, I thought I'd show you these stamps. And as often the case, we have locally produced wartime stamps or conflict stamps. These are the stamps that were used by the Egyptian Expeditionary Force to mail home with. I find it amazing because they're not very expensive. That these things can be copied. You know, there's like reproductions of it, and you know, to be passed over as originals. But I can't see why because they're plentiful. But there's an example of those stamps that are used. In 1920, he returned to the United Kingdom. All right, so it says, and I've got a letter he sent to his boy in a minute. I'll read it out to you, even though I've retyped it so you can see it. And in 21, he was still on the books of the Leicestershire Regiment. He's still on his medal record. In There's a letter he sent home. I think I've translated. It's not very clear, but he sent that home to his son, and so he obviously expected to be going home in the April. And I can read it to you. It just says, "A dear line, hoping you are a good boy to your mother and brother and sister. Well, Charlie, I'm pleased to tell you I'm coming home soon. Not as soon as he thought he was, but I don't know exactly what day it will be. We have finished fighting in this country and we've finished the Turks. So it won't be long before I come home. I've got to watch for your mother's birthday and the Turks watch for you. I'll bring it home with me and give it to you. Well, now be a good boy. I must say goodbye until I come home and see you and your mother." I mean, you can read the rest. It is difficult when you're away from home and family for a long time. I'm sure that many of you know that. These are just a couple of snaps before I move on to the current situation. That photograph top left, 1923, Salisbury Road in Croydon, that was taken. Number 2, Salisbury Road. And that little baby in Elizabeth's arms is my father. Photograph in the middle is my gran at the age of 18. On the right-hand side is my grandfather. I never actually met him. He died a couple of years before I was born, and behind him is my nan. Just a little bit about his character as I kind of know it, really. I think he was a genuinely good person, all right, and I think he installed a bit of discipline in his family and a sense of what's right and wrong, and you'll see that hopefully from what reflected in his kids. I'm not saying he was a saint. He liked his beer, and although not an aggressive person, would always stand his corner. He was also a cheeky chappie, and I always remember this truth that apparently in a pub he took a £5 bet that his son would be called Sir, and of course, as you may know, being a Sir in the UK is being knighted. So this other fella took the bet on, and sure enough, one of his sons was a Sir because when his Thomas was born, which is his son Thomas. His birth certificate has got on it Sir Thomas Augustus Weight, so he won his £5 bet. Right, okay, and that's him really. Now we're going to talk about the current situation. You know, as I say, the Second World War. Oh, by the way, I do want to mention this. He didn't just sit on his hands during the Second War. My grandfather spent a lot of time voluntarily putting up air raid shelters and things like that for people. So, you know, he was too old to do anything else than that. I think he was even too old for the Home Guard. So this is my father. All right, I wanted to get back to a naval theme, and he joined the Royal Navy and served out in the Pacific and on D-Day. He was the youngest of the brothers, and therefore his service was probably some of the shortest, although he didn't leave till much later. Now, there's a photograph of him there in an army uniform. At the age of 13, he joined the Army Cadet Force in 1939 at the Queen's Regiment, Surrey. Now, in Mitcham Road Barracks in Croydon, yeah, sorry. It was up until the war. It was really just a voluntary. Well, it was always a voluntary youth organisation, but it was seen as a voluntary youth organisation. And even and between the wars, even then and even now, up until very recently, it was kind of presented as not being preparing young people for the army. It was more of an adventure. Tried to make it feel like an adventure organisation. But then it changed, and then the culture changed, and it was overtly preparing these young kids to become soldiers. In fact, they were so good at it that during the war, the cadets supported the Home Guard. We'll talk a little bit about the Home Guard later, because before he was old enough to join the Navy, he actually joined the Home Guard as well, and reserve units. So these kids were actually so well trained in the military skills that they could go and help Home Guard units who were like a civilians, a civilian army, a militia. Okay, and that might not mean a great deal in itself, but the government here, anyway, have never been really keen on spending money on the military or the military youth groups. It really is like trying to get blood out of the stone. So, what happened was that it actually actively then said, "No, we're going to pay for this. We're going to pay for it." So it made it a little bit more easier to get kids in and to do more training. They were aware of the pressures of the environment. Now, you might think, okay, 39, he's 13, so he's not going to see much of the war. But I just wanted to show you this, and it's the only one of the presentations where I've included this because he's the youngest, that it wasn't a particularly quiet time. There was a lot of bombing raids during that 1940s, early 1940s on Croydon, and I've got a little map to show you where they lay. So why Croydon? So why Croydon? Why Croydon Airport? Well, I mean, they threw bombs all over the place. I mean, Christ, there was even a bomber in this. I live in a place called Rushton. It's got 26,000 people in it. Not certainly wasn't then during the war, and they managed to blow up an infant school here with bombs. I'm sure they felt quite proud of themselves with that. And so everywhere in the country, you're going to find. It always tickles me really. You'll see a string of Victorian houses, then you'll see a gap with something new. So you know at some stage something happened there. But Croydon particularly had London's only airport. Croydon Airport was London's airport. We had Biggin Hill Aerodrome just on the outskirts. Kenley was not far. We also around Croydon Airport had a lot of factories. There's a particular one, factories that related to the air industry. Jablonski's was quite important. He invented a specific sort of laminate for Spitfire propellers, which and that was based in Purley. So I want to just put this up so you can just give you there's a couple of slides here just to give you an idea of some of now this is not every air raid, every bombing raid, but this is just like a selection as you went past. And some of these, Croydon Airport again there, that was a really difficult day, massive bombing raid then. Wadden, that's near the airfield. But here you've got Addiscombe and Central Croydon. That would have been nearby where Fred and the family lived. Wadden again, Purley Way. That's Purley Way. That's all by the airport. Central Croydon, Addiscombe, local. So you can see it was relentless for quite a bit. So they would have seen. I mean, my mum, who lived a little bit nearer to the centre of London, said that she used to sit looking out the window watching the doodlebugs fly over. So it was kind of like it was there all the time. No one really ever escaped it. And there's another page. It went right through to 1942, and then it started to ease off. I mean, after that were sporadic raids, but the Blitz itself, the worst of it was over by then. I guess that the Germans decided that they needed their aircraft. Their priorities were somewhat different, which was thankful, I guess. And also, of course, it wasn't doing what it set out to do. There's an example of a bomb that went off not far. That's Addiscombe, a bit further out from Addiscombe, probably near towards Ashburton Park. And one bomb has gone off here. It's wrecked that house, taken all the windows out of those. You just hope that whoever it was that lived there wasn't in there. It was probably at two semis there at the time that the bomb went off. Bottom left-hand corner, all those little dots. This is basically where they lived around here. All the dots, red dots, are bombs. I'm not. You know what? I should have looked and I didn't look. I'm not sure what the yellow ones are. I can't remember. The AA are shells that have come back down because, as we know, what goes up must come down, and if you didn't hit something, it was going to land somewhere. The You got V1 markers on there, obviously the doodle bugs, and then V2, but that was later on in the war when they came over. So you can see there's quite a large concentration. And often you'd get that they believed that the bombers would drop bombs, even if they weren't particularly going for the airfields, they'd drop bombs on the way back. or on the way there, so they didn't have to take all the flak over London. Um, anyway, back to Fred. He joined the Home Guard in 1943 when he was 17, which was the earliest he could do. It was originally called the LDV, and then it was nicknamed Look, Duck, and Vanish. All right. Basically, it was a citizens' army. Yeah, and it was for people who were maybe too old for even regular service. The youngsters at 17, you would have been too young. And if you're in a reserved occupation, so it was their way to contribute to a defence. And they were a bit like our Army Reserve were in the respect that they would meet up one night a week, perhaps, and then all week, or maybe two, and then at weekends they would be doing drills and exercises and so on. There's my father's certificate on the right hand side. Anyone who served in the Home Guard got a certificate to acknowledge they did that. A lot of people take the mickey out of the Home Guard, all right. And there's a series, you may have seen it because you have BritBox. If you haven't seen it on BritBox, you might be worth a watch, called Dad's Army. And a lot of people don't take them that seriously, but there were some serious elements. And the particular one I want to draw your attention to was the anti-invasion preparations around the country, mostly in the southeast, were underground bunkers, and they were full of food, weapons, explosive. And some of these chaps, and they also introduced a female version, a ladies' version as well. But mostly it was the lads. They were if we were invaded, the idea was to group in, they in these little groups in these bunkers and carry out sabotage and attacks behind enemy lines. So although people perhaps maybe laughed at it then, maybe they certainly do now watching Dad's Army, it had a really serious element to it. Right. Okay, 1943, he joins the Navy and he joined at HMS Duke. HMS Duke is in the Malverns. The Malverns is gorgeous. If you ever get a chance to come over here and see the hills, it's beautiful. There they are. One side is Wales. I think that's why they put the mountains there. One side is Wales, and then this side is England, and this just nestles in the bottom there. This photograph, as you can see, was taken in 1949 when it was a research establishment. But basically, the format is exactly the same as it was. That's the recreation space. These were the H blocks, the accommodation blocks. That was the parade ground there. They used to do all the usual. That was for Stoker. It was an NGL. By the way, the bottom photo, the bottom left-hand side is the actual rec space. That's looking in that building. Stoker General Naval Training. And, I don't want to dwell too much on basic training because, it kind of is the same wherever you are. Given a uniform, told how to put it properly. You've got to remember that we've got lads who've never been to sea and they don't understand. So you have to kind of cram this naval knowledge in over a very short period of time. Given a hammock, because we don't get hammocks anymore, of course, but told how to lash and stow. But fitness, long runs, firing, drill. This area here was often used. They used to do a lot of cross-country running going through there across the hills. It is quite tough. I did the Malvern Challenge about 8 years ago, where you go across all the hills, and that is really your knees let you know that you've done it. So it was tough training then, but everyone has to do it. He got drafted then in December. He then went to HMS Impervious for his Stoker training, which was in Southampton, I beg your pardon. And he joined HMS Revenge. Now, sorry, he joined HMS Impervious. It was the old Revenge, the 1906, not the one that was out in the Pacific, but the one that was before the First World War. And so he joined them. He had a short Chris Crimbo leave, and then he joined there. 7 weeks training on board. It's again to get them into ship's routine. The photograph at the bottom right-hand side is actually Impervious, where they had the young baby stokers doing the ship's routines and stuff like that. They get lectures on engineering. Now, it says no practice. I'll put that with question mark because at the Imperial War Museum, there's this chap who recited his time and he said there's no practicals. I can't imagine that to be correct. I mean, you're not on a warship as an engineer surrounded by machinery and engineering and not have to put some of your theoretical knowledge into practical. So I struggle with that. The photograph there was one of my father's mates off of the Adamant, which we'll come on to later. He got drafted to HMS Vivacious in March. Right. This is HMS Vivacious just before D-Day. So he joined it on 1st of April, which I always think is quite appropriate when you get any sort of drafting in the Navy. and he joined it at Sheerness, which is HMS Wildfire 3. And that's a small sort of island on the east coast of the southeast. Initially, they did a lot of local escort duties. Now, even though it was a lot many people considered it was a lot safer to take coasters and other vessels around the long way round, okay, to get up to Scotland to and from to London. It was deemed that it was not practical. They reckoned it was you're more open to submarine attack, so they still ran convoys during through the English Channel, and and they covered those convoys. They protected those convoys with fighter aircraft and destroyers such as Vivacious. So he was doing local escort centered around the Thames estuary. So I'm not so, and we'll move on a little bit. June the 3rd. Vivacious joined Convoy S13, which is quite important. It was with HMS Campbell, Northern Gen, four landing ships and four Rhine craft. Landing ships are like your LCT, so they're your bigger landing craft. Yeah, your Rhine craft are more your landing craft personnel, the smaller ones. 4th of June, they moved to Spithead, which is just off Portsmouth, and on D-Day, they arrived at the landing beaches. Oops. Okay. Now I've got this amateur local history video written by the Sheppey Heritage Group or created by them. It is very Sheppey focused. This is where Wildfire was. In fact, if you watch it, you'd probably think that Sheppey won the war on its own. But I do think it does demonstrate it a lot easier than this little movie demonstrates a lot easier than just me having a chat. So just here we go. So bear with it. In the darkness of the 6th of June, 1954, the huge invasion fleet and D-Day beaches. The sweepers, including three ships, warships commenced fire. The Sheerness destroyers, HMS Satisfied, and Cotswold were at Greenwich. HMS Campbell, Vivacious were positioned at June at Salt Beaches. HMS Linden and Vesta were at Holland Beach. The actions of the British destroyer invaded the beaches to give combat support to the assault troops, received high praise, particularly so at Holland Beach, as Holland was ineffective with gun placements and machine gun pillboxes remaining off. Saying the soldiers of the American force in 29 were trapped on the London street. Here to be partly by the general fortifications and one main some of the destroyers action of Sword Beach, acting as the group head issue of anti-war. Soon be actually detonated by the mob and sank on London. HMS Linden. 16th of June, 1944. While still on Sword, the HMS Locust was hit by a German artillery shell. Three after the difficult seafood, faster than the enemy could build up over a shorter land route. Okay, that was that little clip. As I say, he's very passionate about Sheppey, and I think but it was an it's a good insight into the contribution that those ships made. Okay, 9th of June, Vivacious escorted another convoy which sailed from Southend. Southend was a marshalling area on the 9th of June and arrived at Seamay, and he did several convoys, short convoys until July. Well, later on in the presentations, we'll talk about George, and I think he did about 12 or 13 convoys from the UK to the beaches of Normandy. So it went on ordinary convoy duties, destroy for escort duties it had done before. There's some photographs down there which were taken, which were our father's, and there are some of the Atlantic convoys it was on. I have a feeling actually that there was a ship's photographer on board. I used to be a ship's photographer, and I have a feeling there was a ship's photographer on board who probably did these and then sold them off, because I think I've seen these photos in other people's albums as well. So, next interesting part was, okay, apart from that, it was VE Day. All right, 13th of May, in company with HMS Wolston, Norwegian corvette, British and Norwegian minesweepers, and some motor torpedo boats headed for Bergen in support of the reoccupation forces. And this, I think, must have been quite amazing. I remember going down to the Falklands and pulling into Gibraltar and being met by some of the other ships. It was really quite emotional, and I bet it must have been for them too. As HMS Vivacious entered the field, she was joined by scores of small fishing boats and were almost surrounded when berthing alongside the fish quay. That actual photo was taken from Vivacious of Wollaston going in on that day. The quay was packed with Norwegian friends and allies who gave the sailors unforgettable welcome. I think what was amazing about that, from what I've read, and I've tried to read as much as I can on it, and I don't, by the way, pretend to be an expert on any of this. I've only really looked at it through the eyes of my family, but was that the German prisoners had been released apparently, and he said as you walked around there was locals. I mean, I would have probably sure that these Germans would have kept their heads down, but Norwegians, Brits, and all sorts of the allies. And there were still German fellows who no one really took any sort of control of. These photos here, just to give you that certificate on the right hand side was awarded to all those involved with the liberation. That was, I suppose it was auto penned or whatever, printed by King Olaf. On the top left hand side, there the ships alongside. This little motley crew is the stokers on board Vivacious. Interesting, I posted this photograph on a website which was related to the V&W class destroyers, and somebody made a comment that his dad was in it, so I guess they were mates at some stage. The bottom photograph here is HMS Norfolk, because after the initial one, this was taken a little while afterwards, when they were bringing in food and stores, anything that was necessary for the local population who had been starved of most resources. Okay, then we're coming to almost to the end. It's July 45, drafted to HMS Berwick in transit to Australia. We're doing for time, we're doing good. Joined the Pacific Fleet. What you see there arrived in Sydney. Now, nobody in the Navy goes on a ship. It's not like a troop ship. It's not a cruise. You've got to work. What you see is my father's watching station bill there. It tells you, if you look at it, he was a stoker first class. He's at steaming position, which is normal running. He'll be red watch. He'll be working in the after engine room on the port engines. General quarters, what we call action stations, that's the older term, you call battle stations. He'd have been number 2 fire and repair party, which is what I used to do for some ships I was on, a fire and repair party, although we call it kind of a little bit different. What amused me, where it's got your place for abandoned ship, I thought it was over the side. I wouldn't have thought you'd need to write that down. So on the left hand side, another one again, those photographs, as it says on there, depth charging. So they arrive in Sydney and he goes on draft. Okay, and then HMS Berwick goes on. There's HMS Berwick on the bottom left there, and there's his crossing the line certificate. Again, some of you may have one of those yourselves. In August, he arrived at HMS Golden Hind, and I've got some photos of that. I'm quite kind of blows me away a little bit, and I'll go on to that. And then he went on the HMS Glenarm en route to Subic Bay and joined the HMS Maidstone. There's Glenarm top left. This here, the rest of these photos, is HMS Golden Hind. It's actually Sydney Racecourse, and the inside the track is where the camp was. This here is with the admin areas. The bottom left was the admin areas, and you see some of the sailors marching out. That middle one there is main gate, and that sailor scratching his head trying to work out how he's going to find his kit bag amongst the other lot that's been that's been dropped off. So that was quite impressive. That and I think what impresses you, I looked at some photos, and I do believe the stand is still there now. So. Okay, so he went on draft, and incredibly, and why my father kept this, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm glad he did, is his leaving routine. And as you can see, every sailor does it in our Navy anyway. When you leave a ship or establishment, you've got a certain number of departments you've got to go to. You get a stamp to make sure you're okay and that you've returned any clothing, etc., and then you go on draft. HMS Maidstone, which is the one on the bottom right there, is a submarine depot ship. Simple as that. Okay. So 2nd of September, VJ Day, he was on board HMS Maidstone. This is really interesting, actually. And I know it left an impact on him because he spoke about it, and I'm not going to go into it in any detail now. But basically, it was the first British ship to enter Hong Kong and to collect the POWs. They were HMS Exeter. I remember him saying that there was, particularly said that there was survivors from HMS Exeter in those POWs that he picked up. And here they are. The picture on the bottom right-hand side is HMS Maidstone coming alongside in Fremantle, I think. Okay, where it was now. Anyway, coming alongside, it was HMS Adamant is in front. Yeah, is parked here. There's HMS Maidstone. Here is when she's berthed. Yeah, and there all the people are coming off. And the photograph above is from the Maidstone, watching another ship come in with POWs. I mean, I've got the whole news clipping, but I didn't want to see any point in that. So this is HMS Maidstone going through Sydney Harbour Bridge, and there's my father in Australia. I guess that would have been taken October, otherwise around the spring time. Otherwise, he'd have been in White's his ice cream, as we call it, his ice cream suit. 13th of October, he was drafted to HMS Adamant. Basically, they had a crew switch because the Mason came back. The Adamant stayed out there. Adamant with the flotilla. They went to Hong Kong and traveled Christmas Islands and so on and so forth. It wasn't necessarily a goodwill visit, but I think it was to show the flag, and also, as it says on there, to undertake piracy patrols, anti-piracy patrols. There she is there with a full complement of T-class submarines. They were based with her. And this is just now to go through where they went to, really, from Fremantle to Sydney. And then there's a little bit of a tour there, I guess. Eventually ended up in Hong Kong, in Hong Kong. Excuse me. I'm jumping around. Whoop, sorry. Okay, there's his crossing the line ceremony. Another Equatorius. They obviously crossed the line once again, and there's another news clipping from a local Australian paper. Was it the Sydney Morning Star? With the T-class boats alongside. In November, he joined HMS Indomitable, and that's the aircraft carrier on the right-hand side. Indomitable was used during that period, really was to get the POWs home, so that she would sail down, bring and then take home, and he then got drafted to Indomitable to come back with the POWs back to the UK. I don't know whether he was working on there on that particular time, but it was used that. In fact, actually, it's quite famous in Australia. They call the first British rugby team to go down south after the war went down on the Indomitable, and they actually called they were nicknamed the Indomitable rugby team or something like that. When he got back to UK, he joined the Fleet Maintenance Group in Portsmouth, and he basically worked on HMS Argonaut, which is this one here. It would have just been alongside for a refit, and he would have done his work on there. And in June 1947, he was discharged shore. There is medals on the right. There is actual medals. And you've got on there, I can go through them all in a bit, but if you want, the Pacific Star. They were the British sailors who worked out in the Pacific or was posted out there were given the choice to either have the Burma Star or the Pacific Star. And I think my father thought it was more appropriate to take that. 1934 medal, France, Germany Star, obviously for D-Day. 1939 45 Star and the Defence Medal, which would have been related to his time in the Home Guard, as well as his time in the UK. And that, I think, is about that for him. And we're just about to go on to the last one, which won't take very long, I don't think, because Peggy didn't spend a lot of time in the Wrens. Peggy, when she was 18, joined the Women's Land Army, and the Women's Land, as you might imagine, the a lot of the men went to sea. Working on the land, by the way, was a reserved occupation, and so they need not. But many men felt the call, heard the bugle, and rose to it, and they signed up. They enlisted. Okay, and that created huge gaps. Also, there's a lot of land that was turned over to farming that wasn't necessarily used that way. So there was a huge call, a huge resource drain, and they created the Women's Land Army, and Peggy joined that at 1941. I don't know where she worked. I mean, she was a girl from South London. The only time she'd probably seen a farm was when she saw it when it was in a book. So but I guess you do it. You go, you dress, you go, you do as you're told, and I'm sure she made a fantastic contribution. All right, okay. As it says there, in 1944, there were 80,000 women in the Women's Land Army.
Mm.
In 1943, she joined the Wrens, and she joined the Wrens in London. It's a place called Mill Hill, and that is the place there. I think it's a technical college now. She did a basic training there. It was HMS President, was it HMS President 3? And there's a few photos from inside. They still use those counterpanes when I joined up, so probably the same name. And here's some photographs from inside the place. Now, it was an interesting anomaly that when the girls joined, there's always been this thing about the Navy. It's always like a status thing that, and they never really accepted the girls as part of the Navy. They weren't under the Naval Discipline Act. I mean, Wren officers were never saluted. That was not part. They weren't commissioned, so therefore they're not saluted. And the Wrens often didn't take on the same ranks in the early days. It changed, but in the early days they didn't. So they were known as pro Wrens. They were given their kit. Again, I'm not going to go into too much basic training. You can have a look at those bits when as you go through it. They got fed, they got sorted out, they got their kit, and then off to their accommodation. When they were after a short while, when they were deemed to be suitable, they were going to stay. Then they gave them the full kit. The interesting thing was that they had to wear stockings, black stockings. That was a part of the uniform, but the Navy never supplied it, so they got an allowance, and that clothing coupon there, but they got a financial allowance after the war, and that stuck with them right up until the 90s. They still got that financial allowance to buy their own kit. Okay, lasted about a fortnight. They didn't really need to know too much, unless, of course, you were going to be a seaman or you were going to be an engineer. Then you'd go off somewhere else and you'd do additional training. But for most of it, Jenny Wren's, it was a couple of weeks training. Yeah. Okay. Right. First posting was as a in the censor office. Okay, 1944. She was drafted to mail office in London, and she just did censorship duties. And there's an example of a lass doing it down there. She's going through people's mail. And again, something you might be interested in, there's a censorship stamp on there, received for HM ships. I put the HMS cap tally there. Everyone, they didn't have ships' names on cap tallies. Everyone would have worn those. And on the left is Wally, one of my uncles. They were twins, by the way. Wally and Peggy were twins. And by looking at the formation patch on his mate's sleeve, I would imagine Wally and his buddy there were home on leave, and they all met up. It's a lovely photograph. She was, and this is what I mean about the hierarchy, the changes. 5th of June, she was promoted to high rate. If she'd have been a bloke, all right, it would have been leading hand. It's just a terminology, and I never really understand why it should be different. She got drafted to Lock-U, all right, not long once she got rated up. And Lock-U was basically a convoy assembly point. And on the top right-hand side there, you'll see a photograph of Lock-U, where the convoys are being assembled. And on the left is Mel and Charles, which is mostly accommodation, but some administration. Arctic convoys. Okay, the roles there, as you'd imagine, were diverse. Telephonists, stewards, cooks, teleoperators. Peggy was an administrator, so she'd have been a writer, a clerk. Now, what you've got here is what Lock-U looked like at the time. Okay, there's the inlet. You've got this guard loop, and if you look on the top right-hand side, you'll see there's a submarine. That detects submarines going in. You've got the mine loops, which would set one off. And then here, you've got 2 lines of nets. This is what they look like. The bottom picture, black and white photograph, is of Lock-U during the war. would have had boom defense ships in there to let the craft through. And you can see, just as I circle it, you can just see them on the top there. And this area here will be where the merchant ships would muster before they set sail. She worked at Old Bay. I mean, it wasn't it's all one command, all structure, and Mel and Charles, and eventually she worked down here at Portloo. And that's what it would have looked like. Basically, that's that's the bunker she would have worked in. There would have, obviously, you can see at the back there, the heads. There's the control room. There would have been accommodation here. Okay, there'd have been all the facilities that you want. But in essence, that place managed all of those facilities. So the stores would have been at Mel and Charles. Perhaps they wouldn't have had that there, but that was the administrative centre for Lock Q. And here's just a few photos to show you the sort of work that they would do in there. I think the actual, I mean, we had them in Liverpool, they're in Northern Ireland, and of course there was operating in London as well. I think the only one that's likely to have been from Lockheed or one of those similar convoy assembly points is the bottom left. We still use it now as a fueling depot. I've been up there myself, many years ago, but they're still being used now as a fueling depot. And we draw to a close. Okay, just to say that she was demobbed from Lockheed. Again, their roles, they didn't really look after the girls in the same way that they tried to look after the lads. I always find it really disappointing. It was much of a case, well, the war's over now, on your bike, cheerio. And so she wasn't even sent to a discharge centre to go through the demobilisation process. She was just released from Scotland. I'm sure she wasn't unhappy with that, but that goes. These are a few of the badges. The left is the cap badge from the Land Army. This is the medal she would have received. And these ones here are the Wren's badges. Where are we? And these are a couple of photographs, basically the end of part one. I will say this about Peggy, because I'm trying to build a bit of character around these people. I did meet Peggy a couple of times. She was, I wouldn't say a tomboy, but she loved motorbikes. She was a really sort of like get stuck in type person. The photographs here simply are end of part one. At the top there, you've got the Elmer's End bus garage that took a direct hit during the war, and the bottom one there is another photograph of an area of Croydon that got slammed. And basically the next time we get together, should you find this interesting enough to invite me, is we're going to talk about Arnhem, the Arnhem drop, which I'm really quite fascinated about, and some of the other stuff that people have done on convoys. And that, folks, is it. I think we just about cracked it. That's about it. You can have do I have to unshare it now, Laurie? What do I do?
Yeah.
Okay, how do I do it? Stop sharing. Right, I've stopped it.
Yep,
there you go. Well, it looks like you're all awake still.
That was excellent. I enjoyed that immensely. I particularly loved what you did with the D-Day stuff, going from ship to ship and showing some of that. And everybody does the photo for the Jaws of Death, because how can you not? It was, yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to part two.
The trouble is, the only issue you have, I think it's the same for all of us, isn't it? When you want to ask them the questions that you want to ask them, they're not there to ask them anymore. When you're younger, you don't get it and you don't understand it. You don't. And so it makes life it makes it more difficult. I mean, I know some of these people. I mean, I never met my grandfather. I never met. I mean, there was a lot of rumors about what he was like as a person. And there was always sort of like tongue-in-cheek things and stuff. And yet, actually, the more you research what he did and the way his kids, you think, no, that can't be true. He can't have been that sort of like East End wide boy, the sort of that was always in and out of bother. He just couldn't have been that person. And I think it's just a shame that you just can't ask him about it. But Arnhem, I find Arnhem, the next one, Arnhem, I find it. I've done a lot of. I'm almost obsessed by it, to be honest with you. And that fascinates me. The whole operation of Market Garden fascinates. So that'll be the first bit of the next time we're together.
There is a book.
There was a book that's published over here, Maurice, The Wolves and the Birds, or The Wolves and Something Else, that dealt with the Wrens and their contributions to training the escorts for convoys. Now, I don't remember. It's The Wolves and Something Else, and something else is the name of a bird. But it's a good read, and it's an interesting book.
The Wrens. I mean, I think that they are. I think the thing that bothers, it's like the reserves, okay, as well. I mean, like when the reserve, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, when the reserve started up, the Navy didn't want to put a penny in. They had to pay for everything themselves. You know, they got issue with the kit, and it's almost as if, and I found that when I look at these things, it's almost like they don't accept it. It's like, oh, you'll do for now, and then we don't need you anymore, and off you go. I mean, it's different now. All right, everything's integrated, and people, you know, but I think that the girls during the war made an enormous contribution to what went on, and yet you just don't hear about it. You know, you just you know, you have to dig deep. But you know, I mean, I mean, they would work on aeroplanes, they would work on the ships, they would shoreside, you know, and then you get the Wrens that went to sea with the nurses and stuff like that. You know, the medical ships, but you don't get to hear about it. But then a lot of it is, you know, I mean, it's very difficult to know what people actually do. I mean, from my point of view, I mean, these days, I mean, all the First World War records were blown up during the Blitz, right? You know, they were destroyed. And ones that you can find, I was talking to someone who actually got his grandfather's docs, and he said, "Oh, that explains why the ones I've got were singed because they saved what they could, you know." And the East Surrey Regiment Museum had a fire. I've got my grandfather's regimental book from 1902, and I intend to give it to the museum because I think it'd be more beneficial for them to have it than just sat in the loft, you know. But there's a lot of stuff that's gone. The Second World War stuff is not too bad, but it's purgatory to get the docs. I mean, all this, we have this thing called, well, they have a freedom of information, but you've got there's this rule that you've really got to give blood to try and get these service docs out, you know, from the government. You can't, you know, all these. I mean, one of my uncles, George, who I was extremely fond of. I had to get his. I found his. We not, you know, his daughter had to double sign everything. So, and then I had to wait 18 months, and then they missed one off. And it tickled me, right? I asked for two sets of docs at once. They sent me one. 18 months they sent me one. So then I complained. I got the next one in they'd actually not done it. So when they pull their finger out and get it done, a fortnight later I had the other set of docs. So why they waited 18 months for the first one, I don't know. But it is difficult to do it. But but I mean, it's just fascinating. You learn so much when you go through it and do the research. But no, well, anyway, I'm glad you found it interesting.
I wanted to let everybody know you can unmute now. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But we do have a question here from Lee Neal. He says it's very interesting, but he wants to know what class is a T-boat actually?
Well, T-boats I think it would be HMTs or HM trawlers. So I looked at that ship and it doesn't look very much like a trawler to me. So I would imagine it was a size of ship or a size of vessel that was classed as a trawler. So I mean so HMTs are always HM trawlers, but that looked like a gunboat, the one that was on there.
Okay. And I have a really dumb question because I do know the answer to this somewhere in my mind, but you keep dropping in the word doodlebug.
Yeah, a doodlebug.
What is a doodlebug?
First, well, they were the first. You know, you've heard of the they're V1s, V1s and V2s. Okay. The nickname for the doodlebug was the V2, and they were the ones that were easier to intercept. It's funny, you know, I was in my research. I've formulated my own views of Market Garden, and I actually think that if it wasn't for the V2 launchers in Holland, I don't think Market Garden would have been given approval. I actually think that it's because that they wanted to stop the V2 launchers because they were coming over and they were see the V1s, the Spitfires, they were slower and the Spitfires could flip the wings. All right, you know, the wing of and put it off, take it away from London where it went. Of course, no one knows. But the V2s were much faster, and you couldn't do that, and it caused a lot of problems. And I actually genuinely think that was important. But Market Garden is fascinating. I met this Canadian veteran 1 year when I was up there, and he was amazing. I've been to Arnhem a few times. I went there with the Navy, and we did a place called Wageningen, where they have every 5th year they have a big ceremony, and they brought in their vets. Very few. I was in Arnhem a couple of years ago. There was 3 left. I don't know if there are any left still alive now. But this bloke, and he was just amazing. He lived in Vancouver. He's probably dead now, but he was a Boy Scout. And you meet these people, right? And they're not ardent killers, right? they're butchers, bakers, and candlestick. But this fellow was a scout leader. You know what I mean? And he was telling us of his experiences of when he was there, and it was just, I don't know, incredible. I'm not going to say too much. I'll try and save some of it for next week. But it's the real stories of the real people. You know, I'll always remember this. So he said to me, no one had a clue what was going on. He said, my sergeant would say, run over here, I'd run over there. He said, run over there, I'd run over there. Dig a hole, I dug a hole. He said, no one knew what was going on. But I don't know that's true for everybody, but it was just fascinating stories, fascinating stories. But anyway, as I say, as long as you're interested, I'm more than happy to come back and do part two. More than happy.
Oh,
This
yes,
was very good.
we are all looking forward to it, I'm sure. So,
Yes.
yeah, definitely plan on being around on February. I don't remember which day we picked.
I've got it in my diary. I don't.
Yeah, I've got it on my calendar, but I don't remember I think it might actually be Valentine's Day. I think it might be the 14th.
Well, I think
I won't
I
know
got the
that.
21st.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I know that wouldn't be my diary.
Lori, I
So,
got the
but
21st marked on mine.
Oh, okay, then it's probably the 21st. Maybe we chose not to do it on Valentine's Day. So, okay. Whatever it is, Steve will keep us all straight and send us our invitations. So that'll be
yeah,
good.
perfect.
Also, while I'm thinking about it, I plan to put this in my next president's message. But Maurice, you're actually on the committee. I'm sure you got my email asking you to review
I did. Yeah, I've
2025.
been bit. I saw it. I actually did look through it today. I've been really busy, but I've looked through it today, and I will
Yeah,
do.
no, you don't have to get an answer. I mean, I need an answer before May, but I mean, I wanted to send it out so people had time to review it. But you're on the committee to actually pick winners, but you're doing a three-parter this year. So I want you kind of off the committee, and I need Norb, I know you're on the committee also, but I need somebody who's not
What we already agreed to, I'm on the committee too. What we already agreed to is you don't vote on your own stuff.
exactly, and that's why I'm
This ain't a
saying Morris
Chicago election.
Yeah, Morris can't be on this year's for the 2026 year. Morris can't be on
Oh,
because he's
okay.
doing a
Okay, yeah,
three-parter and
fine.
he needs to be eligible. So he cannot be a judge. So somebody who has not done and does not plan to do a 2026 presentation needs to step up and basically you don't have to be here in person, but you have to be willing to go on to our YouTube channel and review things. So if one of you guys wants to think about it and then send me an email, I'm at the Sea Dragons at cox.net. Please do so because Morris is no longer on the committee.
He's an emeritus member of the committee.
Yes, he's an emeritus, but and he can be back next year if he's not planning to do a 2027 presentation. But for this year, I found it was kind of hard to have people who have done. I think Peter had the same problem last year. It was like he was on the committee, but he had also
Well, he
done
just
a
didn't vote for
presentation.
himself. Okay, I mean,
Yeah, well, and it's we have not a lot of people who are doing presentations. So to me, it's important that everybody who does one is eligible. You may not win. I mean, the judges may decide yours wasn't one of the best, but you still need to be eligible for it. So think
by the
about
way,
it.
I didn't get your email.
You didn't?
No, I didn't.
I know you were on there. Okay, so what is your email?
B is in boy, L is in Larry, R is in Robert, P is in Patrick, R is in Robert, O is in Olive, at sbcglobal.net.
Okay, I know I pulled your email off of the roster that Steve sends me. So either I typed it wrong or it's on the roster wrong. So I'm going to send you an email with the list, but I'm also going to make sure that it's right in the roster. So if it is wrong listed on the roster, I will send that information on to Steve.
Okay.
I think you're in the list of the rosters as an N something, right?
And
I don't,
N is
yeah,
N is in Norbert.
yeah, but I'm saying it's your initials, not your
It's
name. But
my
I figured
initial.
that,
Yes. Yes.
yes, and I figured that had to be you because how many N rights are there in our group? So, okay. Does anybody else have anything? Morris, I do have to say again, it was fascinating. I enjoyed every minute of it. That one with the bombs, showing the
Well,
bombs in Croydon, that's frightening actually when you stop and
yeah.
think about the size of the area that must have just been totally flattened.
Well, I didn't show it to you, but that's only a small part. That's only southeast of London. I mean,
Oh yes, I
and so
realize that.
and so the map is. I mean, the East End got really hammered. I think. I mean, and there was like an inferno. But it was just a case of I just wanted to show that even though in his case, from 1939 to 1943, when he joined up, when he was old enough to join up, that he wasn't. That there was lots of stuff going on. He was training as a cadet, and then he was in the Home Guard. Have you ever seen that series, Dad's Army? Do you ever get BritBox or watch that? If
I
you
don't
ever
think I
watch it,
have BritBox, but I actually wrote that down also to see. I know I
it is
don't have
a
BritBox, but it might be on something else.
it's a comedy show that's over here, and we all loved it. It's a classic, over here, and it was written by a chap who was in the Home Guard many years ago, and it kind of satires it a bit, and it's got all the characters are some of the characters are amalgams of people that he met. It is incredibly funny, but it does in an easy way demonstrate what the Home Guard was like. But I always are fascinated by the serious side of it. The blokes who were like the SOE, the hand-picked Home Guard chaps whose job was to conduct sabotage operation. And they were taught. They went to SOE school, and these are like, as I say, Dad's Army. They were taught hand-to-hand combat. All the things that you'd expect. But they were just went back to work on Monday. They became bakers, butchers, bus drivers, whatever it was. And then when it happened, if there was an invasion, or they'd stay in their civvies, of course, muster at their bunker, underground bunker, where it was, and then bingo. And it's just incredible that these people and I think that's what fascinates me more than anything else. That these are not, you know, I mean, my uncle, he volunteered to jump out of an aeroplane. I mean, what's that all about, even? I mean, it's like, I mean,
Well,
and he was a bus driver before the war. I mean, most of my uncles before they joined up were gross. I mean, they were youngsters anyway, so they haven't really got careers, but they'd be grocers lads, or one worked in an engineer for an engineer, and so they're just ordinary people. It's not like they're all professional soldiers. They're just us, just us, really, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, you know.
but they weren't all without experience. I had a relative in Northumberland who had been an officer in the Northumberland Fusiliers in the First War, and he was a
Right.
major in the Home Guard.
Was
In the
he?
Second War,
Excellent.
he wasn't recalled, for full service.
Mm, mm, mm,
And he
mm.
was a banker, it was his day job, but
Well,
he
that's that. You must have seen Dad's Army because
I
there's no
haven't seen it. I've heard of it, but I've
Captain
never seen it.
Manner. Captain Mannering, who's the captain of this home guard, he's a banker. His sergeant is a banker as well. It is very funny. All
Oh,
right,
George
but
and
and
George
but
Orwell, the
yeah,
author, who was, of course, a Spanish Civil War veteran, was active in the Home Guard.
mm. there's. I think it's looked at very fondly, and but it's fascinating that what you're saying about your relative there is exactly what it was like. There were a lot of First World War veterans. I mean, I'm nearly 70, and I mean, they've just changed in the law here, right? See, I mean, I don't care. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm fit and healthy. So if I was ever called upon that I could go, it wouldn't, I wouldn't have the endurance or the strength or what I used to have, but I could do it. But they've now exchanged recall. They've included recall up to the age of 65 now. So you can be remobilized now. If you had retired and gone, you could get called up to the age of 65. I
Oh
mean, and
wow.
so It's a long time, but I mean, you see, that was in the war. That wouldn't have been the case because it was people who were over 42, I think it was,
And
weren't eligible, and they'd have gone in the Home Guard.
I also appreciated your remarks on the Wrens. 'Cause the banker I just mentioned was the husband of a great grand aunt of mine, of a big family that had about as many in the military as you did. But one of his sisters-in-law was a nurse in these were all territorial army folks. But
Yeah,
she was a territorial army nurse and got the Royal Red Cross first class for her World First War service, uh, including on a torpedoed hospital ship, uh,
really,
which
really.
they managed to beach it, so it wasn't sunk, and they didn't have many patients aboard, but there was still a
Mm.
torpedoed hospital ship. But she stayed in the territorial forces nursing service uh, till the late 30s. And by the end of that time, maybe just after her time, they finally got substantive rank with the men. I mean, so she had been something like a senior matron. She turned out, she wound up a major effectively,
Yeah,
as
it's called it.
one of her brothers had been in the uh, garrison artillery. But uh, anyway, they they didn't get that equitable rank until very, very late.
Oh yeah, yeah, I just struggle. I just struggle with it. I mean, I just there's a snobbery about it. I think there's a like in the fact that why did they? I cannot understand. It's not just the Wrens; it's the reserves had the same problem. I mean, it was a long time. It was after the first. I think it was after the First World War. I can't remember now. Before when they started giving adult men the same equivalent ranks, they just couldn't accept that reservists could do certain jobs to the same standard, which it has been proven not to be true. And I think they had the same view of Wrens. They wear the same badge. They say that. I mean, their killick is a fouled anchor, so they're that, but they would be called something else, which I just think I never really understood why. It is a fascinating. I'd love to hear your stories actually, because that sounds fascinating to me. I mean, I think that the Quorns, as we have in the Navy, the Queen's Alexandria's Auxiliary Nursing Services Quorns. I think the Army, it's the Queen Mary's nursing. So I can't quite remember. But they do a tremendous job. I mean, a lot of my friends were out in the Gulf, out in Basra with the nurses, medical. Like you, I don't know what they call it really, because I'm not that. But I mean, like MASH, the TV series. It was that sort of setup where they just flew out and set up the camp and looked after the lads and lasses that were out there, and they were out. They do a tremendous, absolutely tremendous job. I think. I mean, I looking looking at some of the stuff because some of my uncles were casualties and they had to go. So you look into the field hospitals, where they went and where they didn't. I mean, my other grandfather, I'm obviously because it's my maternal side, I haven't really covered it, and I won't cover it. This was a machine. It was in the machine gun infantry during the First World War, and he got gassed. And I've got a photograph of him, and we used to have hospital blue. If you were injured and sent home in the UK during the First World, there's this thing about feathers, white feathers. There's so many things I don't like about the way people used to live, how they used to behave. And so what they did was, if you were injured, you would have what they call a hospital blues. So you'd have a blue unit, you'd get rid of your grey uniform, you'd have a blue uniform with a white trim. And that's how you could walk around and people won't think you were swerving military service. They knew you were wounded. And then if you was in like convalescence at home, they gave them badges. All right. So people could see it. So he got gassed and then he was never well enough. It's a long story, boy with it all, to go back to front life service. So he went out to Northern Ireland. Or it wasn't Northern Ireland then, it was Ireland, because they had the troubles in 1917. He was out there. And he lived in the end. After the Second World War, his lung got that bad. They took one of his lungs out. I hope I've got the story right. And the doctor said to my other nan, he said, "Look, he's only got about 2 weeks to live." So she said, "Well, if he's only got 2 weeks to live, he might as well live it at home." And he lived for about, I don't know, for another 15, 20 years. And he's just incredible. I mean, I always remember going near his house as a kid because they used to live. It's not there now. A really typical terraced Victorian house. It never had sanitary. Used to have a thunderbox. The toilet was outside, out the back garden. It was an old thunderbox, we used to call it, out the back garden. And it was really sort of like two up, two down. And he would be downstairs in his bed in the what was called like the very in the front room, and he'd still have a beer. It's nan, my nan, and he'd be sitting there smoking his roll ups, and he didn't care. One lung, he didn't. But they were the ones during the Second World War when the wall blew in. That saying about those bombs. He was the one who came home from work one day and said, "Look, Liz, you need to. I've got a bad feeling about today. So I don't know what it is. We need to go down the shelter because I didn't used to go down the shelter. And there was a bomb went off, not there, but not far away, but not part of the wall of the kitchen in, which is where she would have been standing. So it's just all. But it's just, I think they just
Amazing.
if they live. But I'm not here to tell all these stories. But there's a lot of stories about my family, both sides, that are so funny. I mean, and just things that have gone on that, when they were many, many years ago, which are quite comical. But yeah, I'd love to hear about your story about your rally in Northumberland. I think that would be fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Okay, well, I don't know about anyone else, but I have to leave. So I think it's
Yeah, bedtime for me. Football's on now.
I was going to say, how early in the morning is it for you over there?
Well, it's now. Well, actually, the football played. We won this week, which is quite unnerving. When people talk about depression and mental health, then you just got to watch my lot play football, and then you understand it all. So we're watching, but they won today, so I've recorded it. So I'm going to watch it when I get down. So late night tonight for me.
Okay.
Anyway, it's lovely.
You take care. We will see
Take
you
care.
in February.
See you
Bye,
soon.
everybody. It's time
Take
to
care
log
now.
off.
Bye bye.
Bye.